Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Silva. I am going to be your instructor for this online version of content area reading this summer. So I apologize that I haven't posted my video yet, but it occurred to me after the first person posted theirs that I might could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and both introduce myself in this video and give you a little bit of feedback on your comments on the reading. So I've waited until I got to sit down and watch everybody's video before creating mine, and I'll get to responding to those comments in a second. But first I'll go ahead and introduce myself some more. So like I said, I'm Dr. Silva. I am originally from New Jersey, but I lived in the Myrtle Beach area for 10 years before coming to the upstate to pursue my PhD in literacy, language, and culture. I am a former high school English teacher. I spent the last 7 years teaching at universities and doing professional developments with school districts, doing professional developments overseas, teaching overseas. I've been able to dip my toe in just about everything the field of education has to offer in the last 7 years or so, with the exception of school administration. I'm not a principal, but I've had a taste of just about everything else, research, you name it. This summer will be my last summer teaching college courses for a little while. I'm actually going back to the classroom to teach middle school ELA. I'll be teaching 7th grade. So again, expanding my horizons all the time. I have worked with elementary teachers and elementary students with the America Reads program. I used to direct that as well. So I've been around. I've done a lot of different things, seen a lot of different things, talked to a lot of different teachers, worked through a lot of different challenges. And this course in particular, this will be the 8th time that I've taught this specific course at some university or another. So we are right up my alley. This is my business. I love teaching this course. I love this topic. Part of my dissertation focused on some content area literacy. So there's a lot that we could have discussed in this course, but I've tried to whittle it down to a minimal amount of theory and a maximal amount of strategies and practical applications. My experience and feedback from students in the past has pushed towards that direction, wanting more practical applications and less theory. So that's what our goal was. That's what we tried to set up with this syllabus, and y'all will get a feel for that as we start to work through each week's reading. Some more about myself and my background. I am married. I have a 3-year-old daughter. I have 2 massive dogs, one pit bull boxer mix and one Argentinian mastiff. She's 120 pounds. So I got big hairy babies. I love to bowl. I used to be an athlete my whole life. Blew my knee out pretty good a couple years ago. So basketball and things like that are kind of off the table now. So I'm officially a competitive bowler now. And that's my new hobby of choice. So I think that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and quickly talk a little bit about content area literacy, what that is, what that means, and what you all had to say about that, and what my hopes are for you all for this course. So content area literacy can be a little difficult to put your finger on if you don't have a broader frame of reference in terms of disciplinary literacy, and they're often discussed in the literature base kind of hand in hand. We are not going to get into disciplinary literacy in this course. I believe that disciplinary literacy would take a whole nother course to go over. And truthfully speaking, this is something I addressed in my dissertation as well. Disciplinary literacy is a relatively new field. So there's not a whole lot in the literature base to offer in terms of the how. How do we do and enact this theoretical framework? Whereas content area literacy, on the other hand, which is kind of like the little brother of disciplinary literacy, if you will, that theoretical framework, we have decades of research and evidence and strategies that have demonstrated success. So we're going to focus on what we know and what we know works and what we have some guidance on how to enact, and we're going to do that as well as we can. So that is why this course is focused on content area literacy, content area reading and writing, and we don't touch on disciplinary literacy. Now, of course, if you don't know what that is, I can gist that for you as well, and I think that'll help make content area literacy and what we're doing here a little more clear. So there's kind of three things that I want us to get our head around from the start, and hopefully we're not going to step on your foundation, your literacy foundations courses, their toes too much with this. But first, literacy. What is literacy? What does that mean? How do we define that first? I think the easiest way to frame literacy moving forward is the meaning-making process. Anytime that we are making meaning, we are essentially engaging in some literate practice. The most basic example would be reading a text, a print text, right? You are decoding symbols and translating them into some sort of broader meaning, and you're contextualizing that within the framework of your existing knowledge. So that right there, reading is a very concrete, simple example of literacy. But really, we can tag literacy to anything that you do where you're making meaning. Right now, watching this video, listening to me, you're engaging in a few different literacies. Technological literacy, for one, to be able to open this video, to know how it operates, what the buttons do, what you need to look at, all that stuff takes a certain sense of technological literacy. Basic oral literacy, right? I'm using language as a medium to translate my abstract thoughts into something that you can then read and make meaning with, and hopefully the meaning that you get from the words that I put out closely resemble the ideas that started in my head. So that's a form of literacy. Pedagogical literacy, some of the words that I'm using and concepts that I'm referencing require a type of schema and background knowledge, specialized vocabulary that all comes with pedagogical literacy. And then, of course, there's your own knowledge and background, and you're taking everything I say and you're mixing it with what you know in your content area specialties, and you're putting them all together to create a contextual understanding from what I'm saying. So this is literacy. And again, we can apply this to anything. Looking at a painting, right? That's a visual literacy. So anything under the sun. If you're making meaning, you're engaging in literacy. The second thing is how we think about content areas and what they are. I would like for us to move forward thinking of content areas as communities of practice. It's a very specific phrase. Communities of practice comes from sociocultural theory. And that is because each of our content areas and lots of other disciplines and domains are more or less defined by and distinguished from others by their literate practices. How they communicate, how they construct knowledge, how they share knowledge, their values, purposes, goals, ways of solving problems, tools, all these things both separate different communities, like math and English, for example, and also define, right, how they function and what it means to be a member of that community and to be able to function in that community. So that's what we want for our students, right? We want them to be welcome members of our disciplinary communities, our content area communities. If you're a math teacher, you want your students to be welcomed as mathematicians. You want them to become mathematicians in your classroom. So what that means is mathematicians are defined by their literate practices. Again, how they communicate, what they do, what their goals are, how they solve those goals, what tools they use to solve them. And that's different from other disciplines. So disciplinary literacy is concerned with those highly specialized and unique practices, meaning-making practices that define each discipline, each content area. Content area literacy, on the other hand, is concerned with what overlaps, those transferable skills and transferable practices and habits that are valuable and useful in all content areas. And there's a massive literature base that tells us that students who have better reading levels, higher reading levels, who are better at reading, do better in other content areas. And this is well documented. And the reality is, the third thing that we want to get our head around is texts vary by genre and are not limited to print symbolic letters. Anything that we read constitutes a text. So if you're a social studies teacher, your maps are texts. Your graphs are texts. They have to be read by students. Students use those tools to make meaning. So being able to read a map is a literate practice, one that dominates the social studies more so than, say, mathematics. Now, there is overlap, right? There are some things that reading a map, the skills that go behind reading a map, are similar to some other skills in mathematics, right? You've got a legend that tells you how to scale distance in a map that requires mathematical literacy. So there's lots of overlap as well. There's differences and there's overlap. Disciplinary literacy is concerned with the differences. Content area literacy says, hey, we should look at what's consistent, what good, competent readers do as a matter of habit whenever they encounter and have to work through challenging texts. And those are the things that we should teach students. And they can take them from one class to the next to the next, and those skills will be reinforced from one class to the next to the next to the next. And the hope is, and again, the research shows that with that growth in reading ability and that reinforcement in reading ability across the content areas, that they actually grow their content knowledge in those content areas as well. So literacy really becomes a means to an end for the content area teacher. It's not an add-on. It's not something extra that you're teaching. It's something you're already doing in your classroom. You're just not giving specific attention to unless you're teaching ELA. And even then, that's not always the case that we focus in on those literate practices the way we should. So content area literacy, in a nutshell, is those practices and habits of good readers that we want to scaffold and teach our students so that they become habits for them. And they can use those skills and use those strategies to help work through challenging texts across content areas. That's the gist. And it took me like 8 minutes to gist that. So I'm sure you're probably going to have some questions, and we can get into that throughout the semester. But I wanted to give you some sort of baseline understanding of what we're dealing with and where we're heading and why. So again, this class, theory light, less than the first half, we'll be focusing and talking about theoretical frameworks and approaches. And then the second half of the course, we are very specifically focusing on concrete strategies. And my hope for you and for this course is that you will all leave with an overflowing toolbox of resources, particularly strategies that you can use to scaffold students who need support getting better at reading. And once you start digging into the data on your students' reading ability and you start looking at their writing very closely with some of these theories in mind, you're going to have a better idea on how to target strategies to specific students to target their specific needs. And that's the ultimate goal, is that this is going to help you generally support reading and writing in your class, but also become a better differentiator when it comes to reading and writing and supporting students who need maybe a little bit more, something specific that's different than the rest of the class. And you'll find that's often the case. So I think that covers everything that I asked you all to discuss. Obviously, I said a whole lot more. But if you do have questions, if there's anything that I just brought up that you really want to talk about in more depth or get some more clarity on, I'm happy to discuss it with you. 2 readings I will recommend on some of those things that I was just discussing that'll be helpful moving forward with a lot of what we do is Mediated Instruction, Vygotsky. You're gonna get familiar with the name Vygotsky. Things like the zone of proximal development you'll talk about in other courses. But Vygotsky is more or less the foundation of all sociocultural theories. And one of the main theories that he proposed was that all learning is mediated. And that idea is very powerful and I think helpful in thinking about how to apply some of these strategies when we get to planning on how to apply them. The other reading I would recommend to you is Z Fang. Z Fang is a linguist, and he dabbles in literacy. And he actually did a discourse analysis looking at different content areas, social studies, science, ELA, and broke down grammatically, like on a grammatical level, exactly how language was used differently in content-specific texts, grammatical patterns that are distinct from other content areas. So he makes this idea very concrete that reading and literacy is very, very much alive and well in every content area, not just ELA. And then it takes different shapes and forms. So we'll focus on what's transferable. We'll work on building your toolbox up with some strategies and scaffolds that you can throw at your students when you meet challenges and when they meet challenges reading. And hopefully you'll feel much more prepared and ready to tackle the challenges of the classroom when you get through with this summer course. So I encourage you to email me anytime with questions. If you ever need anything, I'll try to get back to you within 24 hours. Otherwise, I look forward to your responses to the readings for week 2. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.